Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. WikiLeaks, as everyone knows by now, has released thousands of documents that were leaked to it, still by someone unknown, but obviously someone in the US military. And one of the most contentious things that's come out of the release is the role of Pakistan in the Afghan war. Here's the piece quoted from the New York Times. The documents suggest that Pakistan, an ostensible ally of the United States, allows representatives of its spy service to meet directly with the Taliban in secret strategy sessions to organize networks of militant groups that fight against American soldiers in Afghanistan and even hatch plots to assassinate Afghan leaders. Well, that piece in the New York Times and others that have highlighted that issue out of WikiLeaks sparked a response from Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. Here's what he had to say. The documents circulated by WikiLeaks do not even remotely reflect the current realities on the ground. For example, a retired Pakistani general is named as the master planner of the Afghan Taliban strategy, but this is a man who hasn't held a position within the Pakistan intelligence or the military for more than 20 years. For its part, Pakistan's current leadership will not be distracted by something like these leaks. We've paid an unprecedented price in blood and treasure over the last 2 years. We will not succumb to the terrorists. And a little further on, he writes, this is Pakistan's war as much as it's a battle for civilization. Now joining us from Boston, Massachusetts are Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould. They're journalists, documentary producers, and authors. The book that you can find now on the bookshelves and at Amazon is Invisible History, Afghans' Untold Story. And they've been focusing much of their work since 1981 on Afghanistan, and particularly the American role there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Paul.
So you've gone over some of the WikiLeaks material. I know it's thousands of documents, but particularly on this issue of Pakistan and its role there and the controversy. What do you make of it?
Well, it's interesting that you should cite Hussein Haqqani because we have met Hussein Haqqani in the past, and he is very interested in helping to develop the civilian aspects of Pakistan's economy as well as democracy, and that's a fundamental issue with what's been going on with Afghanistan and Pakistan. The fundamental problem that comes out of the WikiLeaks material is that Afghanistan and Pakistan both have conflicting objectives in terms of what they're.
Let me interrupt for just a sec, because just to point out that the Pakistan ambassador Haqqani has written a book called The Military and the Mosque, which was actually very critical of the army's connections with extreme Islam or extreme Islamists. So it gives him a particular kind of credibility on this issue.
There's no question about that. But he's walking a very fine line, too, with the military. The military definitely, as Zardari has become less and less effective and prominent.
This is the new president.
This is the new president, has become less and less prominent in the scene. Haqqani has also been kind of given, from what I understand, has been kind of given his notice that if he doesn't tread the interests of the military, that he's going to be in a lot of trouble. And that's been an issue.
For those of people that don't know Pakistan, the real power in Pakistan is the military. So.
Well, that actually, truly, it really goes back to the 70s, when the United States really began to get involved with the Pakistani military and ISI in order to begin the process of what became the ultimate destabilizing the Soviet southern border, using the Islamist extremists to do this. And this process really drew the Pakistanis into it. And obviously, they're still living with the legacy of that, too.
See, so what Haqqani is trying to do is he's trying to walk that middle road, which I think is what the Obama administration is trying to do as well, which is why there isn't any really clearly stated objective. There's this kind of vague idea that the United States is going to be going after al-Qaeda, whether it's in Afghanistan or whether it's in Pakistan. But the real issue is really Pakistan's military and how much control they have over the country and how much willingness they have to share an agenda with the United States. And that's really what's at issue here. And a lot of stuff has come out, not just in the WikiLeaks, but over the last few months, indicating that General Kayani it has been forging a deal with Hamid Karzai that would essentially bring the Haqqani network and his al-Qaeda friends into the government of Afghanistan, because the United States has this deadline on troop withdrawal for July of 2011 to begin the drawdown. In other words, Kayani's logic is basically, well, why, Mr. Karzai, should you make allies, continue to have allies with the United States when we're still going to be here and they're going to be long gone?
In the New York Times paragraph I quoted, they talk about a retired general. Everyone knows they're talking about Hamid Gould, who used to be head of the ISI many years ago. And as I think everyone also acknowledges, was the Pakistani ISI man that helped create the Taliban. On the other hand, Ambassador Haqqani has been very critical of all this, the role the Pakistan and ISI, military and ISI played in supporting extreme Islamists, particularly in Afghanistan. But I also understand that when General Kiani comes to power, it partly represents having had a purge of the Pakistan military of elements they thought weren't friendly enough to the United States. Since 9/11, particularly in the last few years, there's a big purge. So it's very complicated who's who here. How do you assess it?
It is complicated when you get down to the local Pakistani politics and the class structure in Pakistan. The military tends to be much more middle class. The ability to work your way up to the top, there's much more initiative involved in that. The ruling class tends to be old aristocracy. They tend to be the political class, the people that make up the political class. So they don't really want change. So there's a kind of conflict in there. But then you've got this other aspect, this extreme Islam that's coming in from the Middle East, as an example. And reports have stated that just recently, within the last 2.5 years, that billions of dollars have come in from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, from independent contributors through North Waziristan into Afghanistan to support these various networks, through the Haqqani network, as an example.
Tell us a little bit about the Haqqani network and what they represent.
Well, the Haqqani network goes back to the 1980s and the U.S. support for the Mujahideen Holy Warriors. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was one of the first and most prominent people that was given support by the United States and is still trying to get into the Afghan government now, apparently has been talking to Holbrooke about being a part of some new Afghan government. He was a very extreme radical, offended a lot of people. It was a lot of people were very suspicious about the way he conducted his activities and whether he was really actually fighting the war or just storing the weapons for his own use when the war was over, kind of playing the waiting game. And Jalaluddin Haqqani was basically trained by the United States, backed by the United States in Saudi Arabia. I believe his wife is from Saudi Arabia, so he has very strong connections there, which is another aspect of what's been going on. You can't just draw the line at the Durand line and say, well, that's Pakistan and the other side is Afghanistan. It's very complex in terms of what they refer to them as the Afghan Arabs.
Even in the kind of pressure we've seen from the U.S. administration and American press that Pakistan's not doing enough, it's not doing enough, they don't say a word about the millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia that's flowing into the theater.
No, they don't. And there's a very active connection. If you want to go to Afghanistan, you fly to the Middle East, you fly to Dubai, and you fly in from there into Kabul. And a lot of the people who were involved in the Mujahideen efforts back in the 1980s, after that left Afghanistan when the war broke out between the various factions during the 1990s. And they set up businesses in Saudi Arabia, and they set up businesses in the United Arab Emirates and in Qatar, places like that. And so those banking places, those businesses have continued to function and have a relationship with many of those old Mujahideen leaders, of which Jalaluddin Haqqani and his son, Sirajuddin Haqqani, are now very active members. They were considered to be, by the Central Intelligence Agency, to be the most effective fighters. And they were very effective. In fact, I believe Haqqanis were considered to be the ones who introduced suicide bombing into Afghanistan. Now, you must recall that suicide bombing was something that was not endemic to Afghanistan. In fact, when the CIA and the Pakistanis tried to get the Mujahideen back in the 1980s to use suicide bombing, the Afghans wouldn't do it because they didn't want to hurt their own people. It was indiscriminate killing, and they didn't want to involve themselves in it. So this is a whole this political Islam that's come in from the Middle East is almost antithetical to what Afghanistan was prior to this invasion. Basically,
this controversy between the U.S. and Pakistan, are they doing enough? It's hard to say how much controversy there is at the governmental levels, because the American government officially says Pakistan is doing enough. But isn't part of the real question here is that there really are two Talibans. The Taliban that Pakistan's fighting in Waziristan, south and north, is not the same Taliban as they're being accused of supporting in Afghanistan, which is people call the Afghan Taliban. So in fact, both things can be true. They can be fighting vigorously in Waziristan, but over here be collaborating, supporting, and doing all kinds of things with the Afghan Taliban. Is that true?
Well, I think there's actually an issue of the fact that there have been nationalists who have been targeted, and it's very easy. This is part of the issue about the Predator drone strikes in Pakistan that really have been possibly used for political assassinations. So that when you conflate the idea of anybody who is Taliban, it becomes the enemy. But then when you really get into it and look at the political issues that the Pakistani ISI and the military really are carrying out against nationalists, the issues that have to do with Baluchistan and Sindh, and the issues that are not resolved because of the Durand Line, because of the whole issue of the Pashtun homeland, that really is now Pakistan, part of Pakistan.
So just to be clear here, you're talking about nationalists that are within what's now called Pakistan, like in Baluchistan, that this isn't all about fighting Islamic extremism. It's also about fighting, you could say, people fighting for their own rights within Pakistan.
Exactly. And this has been going on since 1947. So you're really looking at an issue that's easily conflated for very specific political agendas to, as a kind of cover for other agendas being carried out. And in terms of the Afghan Taliban versus the Pakistani Taliban, one of the key issues people have to realize is that the Afghan Taliban is supported by Pakistani ISI. So in terms of the
And
that's what the ambassador seems to be denying. And that's what they're saying.
He's trying to draw some very fine lines that aren't really there. And that's from our understanding. You have to really consider the Taliban, whether it's the Tariqi Taliban in Pakistan or the so-called Helmand province Taliban in Afghanistan, that it's really all the creation of the ISI. And everything else is a public relations gambit. And you can't, I mean, anybody who's been involved with this. When I was there in 2002, we met up with a Time magazine correspondent who had been with the Mujahideen, who marched over the mountains with the Mujahideen back in the 1980s. And he told us specifically that he had spoken with aid people, he'd been down south, and he said that the ISI was actively recruiting for Al-Qaeda in villages in Helmand province. Now, this was in the fall of 2002. And he said they're doing this right in front of everybody, and everybody knows it, but the US military isn't doing anything about it. Why? So this has been common knowledge. So this is the issue about the WikiLeaks is, one of the criticisms is that there's nothing new. Well, there's nothing new if you haven't paid attention.
Okay, in the next segment of our interview, let's step back and let's look at how this all begins, because it may have been Pakistani ISI that helped create the Taliban, but it was US policy that helped create the context for all of it in the first place. So let's go start from there, and then we'll get ourselves back up to the present. So please join us for the next segment of this interview on the Real News Network.